always love to do before we begin my message is there's some people in this church that never get much attention until something goes wrong, and then everybody turns around and stares at them. So this morning, could we give a round of applause for the people that do the sound? And the other person I always like to thank, and there may be more than one, but I'm aware of at least one. One of the problems is that as a potter, every church that I go to, I leave my mark behind. So yesterday I met Trace, and Trace is doing custodial work here at the church. So he's going to have a little extra work probably this coming week. So could we give Trace a hand as well? Thank you. Well, it's so good to be here this morning with you guys. And some of you have seen me before. I'm going to be probably doing a slightly different talk. I have the clay version of the Bible. It goes with me everywhere. And I have my mug with me as well. And I think we're ready to go. So, for those of you who are going, we got this artsy guy up here this morning. Where's the pulpit? Where's the minister? So I just want to introduce this whole message by saying to you, let's test you out. The first 5 words in the Bible. Say it with me. In the beginning, God created. Oh my gosh. And you and I were made in His image. So guess what? We are all creative. Now, I'm creative with pottery. Some of you are creative in the way you cook. Some of you are creative in the way you drive. Some, on and on. Creativity is all over the place. It just means, exhibiting that which you have something unique to offer. So in my case, I've been a potter since, about 1974. I went to college for that. I didn't think I would ever be a pastor, so I didn't go to seminary at all. So this clay here right now, it has serious wobbles. And the very first thing I'm going to do with the clay, and by the way, I want to say a couple things about clay. Clay is a material that most people kind of look at as like mud. It's pretty common. It's not like working with silver or gold or silk or rosewood. And yet, I look at it and I see all of its potential in the same way that God looks at us and sees the potential. We may be a wreck. I mean, there was a period of time in my life when I was a disaster. And some of you have been there. But God saw past that to all that He had for me. I mean, if He had told me I was going to be a pastor, I wasn't even a Christian in those days, I would have run fast. But God has all different invitations for all of us here. So this clay could say, hey, I'm clay, that's good enough. And we could say, hey, I'm such and such a person, that's good enough. But God has vision for each one of you, just as I have vision for this clay. In the book of Isaiah, I believe it's chapter 64, verse 8, the prophet says to the Lord, he says, you are our Father, you are the potter, and we are the clay. So take a good look. This is what the word of the Lord says. We are clay. Pretty common stuff. But God, like I said before, God looks at each one of us and says, ooh, I've got good stuff here. And I look at this clay and say, yeah, I'm going to make something beautiful and functional and useful, and it will go out with my name on the bottom of it. And the other thing is every one of us and every one of my pots is slightly unique. Because no one else has the same fingerprint as you do. No one else has the same exact story of life that you have. And God uses all of that uniqueness to reveal His greatness, His glory. And this clay is going to become unique as well. So the first thing that has to happen here is, and I like to name my pots on the wheel. So this one, we'll call him Joe. And Joe's kind of a wreck right now. This is kind of, I don't know how about you, but before I have my first cup of coffee in the morning, yeah, pretty wonky. And if I were to try to make a vessel out of Joe right now, it would go worse and worse, and the problem is it would land in your lap, and your folks probably wouldn't want that. So you might enjoy it, but so I have to do what's called centering it. And for centering, it's a process of beginning to make the clay still before I can begin to form something out of it. And I would encourage all of you to, probably best early in the morning, find a place to set before God or walk with God and become still. Those oftentimes are our moments of inspiration, certainly our moments of becoming ready for the day ahead. We could receive the love of God for ourselves and then give that love away to others. And centering takes time, and you know, when we first start, I would encourage you to at least do 3 minutes. And then begin to add, because you'll find that it's really fruitful for the rest of the day. You can do it with prayer. You can just wait on God. We live in a marvelous location in Salida and actually have the Arkansas River running right beside our property. So when it's warm, I like to go out there and sit down sometimes. Just let the water go by. Look up at the mountains. Contemplate the goodness of God in that. You know, even Jesus the Son of God would take time to connect with his Father. He said something really quite amazing in John 5, verses 19 and 20. He said, the Son, meaning himself, can do nothing by himself. He can only do that which he sees his Father doing. Is that amazing or what? Jesus was totally dependent on listening to God, his Father, for that moment, for that hour, for that day, and being obedient to that. That's what he did. But I love the second verse. It's encouraging to me and should be encouraging for all of us. Jesus said, because the Father loves the Son, he shows him all that he's doing. So in our still time, I believe that God will begin to set pattern for the day. And if we're open to him all throughout the day, he will continue to lead us and guide us. You know, and it may be fairly simple directions, like, you know, you go into the store, you go into Safeway or Walmart or King Soopers or wherever, and, you know, you're shopping for hamburger that morning. And as you walk in, there's this quiet kind of inner nudge that says, bread. You're like, no, I'm going for hamburger. And I find that when I argue with God, I never win. And even if I win, I lose. But so you go down the aisle of pastry and bread, and as you go down the aisle, you suddenly see a person that you know very well. And you go up and say, hi, how you doing? And the person kind of hangs their head, and yeah, I'm not doing real good. And they go on to explain their situation. And so we in the Vineyard, we've been taught to say, hey, can I pray for you right now? Because a lot of us hear, can I pray for you, with the idea that the person's going to go home, and then some hour later or so, pray for them if they remember. But we're rather bold in this movement, and we'll say right now. And you don't have to stand in the middle of the aisle with your cart like this. You know, it's good to just kind of saunter off to the side a little bit and then just quietly pray for them. It's a powerful thing. You'll see God do amazing things, and peace come on that person, and they walk away with much more joy, much more love. We're just about done here with the centering process. You've been very patient. It's kind of a slow process, but it's totally vital. How many of you have ever made pottery on a wheel? Raise your hands. All right. So you know about this. So those of you who have done that before, I'd ask you to be praying for me this morning as I'm doing this. Because this is almost 20 pounds of clay. It's a lot of clay. So the next thing that's going to happen here is I'm going to find the very center of this lump of clay. It's called opening up. And I'm going to put my hand all the way down inside, maintaining a center spot. And I can tell that it's center because it's totally still. And as I'm going down, we as potters are looking to feel if there's any impurities in the clay that would make the vessel difficult to make. Perhaps sand or air bubbles. In the old days when clay was dug out of the earth rather than being mined, a lot of times there'd be sticks and just things that would make the pot, perhaps even destroy it in the process. You know, for those of you, I'm working on a reverse mohawk. For those of you, I know it's kind of slow to get sometimes, that are up in years, here's a word of encouragement. The best clay to use is clay that has been set aside when it's wet, soft like this, set aside and stored. In my case, I store it in buckets so it won't dry out. And let it sit for a year or two or more. And that clay can be stretched. It's called extremely plastic, meaning elasticity. That clay can be made into forms that new clay cannot. So be encouraged with that. You have much to offer. I mean, every age does, but sometimes we feel like, okay, let's live out on the recliner. Watch our hair turn gray or fall out or whatever. So in this opening process, I'm also going to create the foundational shape of the clay, the pot I'm going to make. In this case, it's going to be a tall cylinder, so it's going to be a flat base with a right angle, perpendicular to the inside. If it was a bowl, it would be shaped like this. If it was a platter, it would be shaped way out. And I think about that as a metaphor of how God puts foundations in our lives. You know, every house, before it's built, there's a foundation, or hopefully a foundation that's created that determines the shape, the size, the dimensions of that house, and also gives it stability. If it was just built on sand or dirt, it could easily decompose. It's the same thing with our walk with God. God creates a foundation in our lives. Sometimes we're not even aware ahead of time of what He's doing. It's just, this and that. When I was a kid going to elementary school, and I don't think this is done very much anymore, but when I was a kid, my favorite part of school was show and tell, like in 2nd, 3rd grade. And this boy would always have something to show and tell. And here I am, showing and telling. So God really knows what He's doing with us. He gave me a real compassion for the poor and those who are struggling long before I was a Christian. And that's still one of my major parts of this ministry. I really enjoy doing this for soup kitchens, or occasionally I get to be in prison. I get out, but I get to go to prison. I work sometimes with Christian addiction programs like Celebrate Recovery. And I find that work to be incredibly rewarding, just to watch the hope begin to develop as they're watching a physical act. To dream that God could actually change them for the better, change their lives. So the next thing I'm actually in process of doing is what we call raising up or pulling up the walls of the clay. And it's going to get taller and taller. And it's done by the process of a hand on the inside, hand on the outside, applying pressure, and it pushes the clay upward. So I think of the inner hand of God inside of us, dwelling, living in us, and ministry on the outside. Because the more that he lives in us, and the Spirit of God lives in us, according to Christ at the Last Supper, he will live in us. I mean, it gets crowded in there. The more that we desire to love people and minister the kingdom of God to them. There's all sorts of ways that we can minister. I'm going to pick a couple people in my town. There's a woman who's now in her mid-70s, but for years and years, her name is Bonnie. For years and years, she and her husband would buy houses that came on the market that needed work, and they might be small, they might be trailers, whatever. And they would buy them, fix them up, and then rent them at a very inexpensive or sometimes even free to those who were challenged, those who needed a place to live and get their lives started again. They own about 25 houses in my town. And she's just constantly doing really cool stuff for people, for our community. And then there's another guy named Tony. Tony grew up as a truck farmer. His parents were in another town nearby. And then Tony moved to Salida and got his tractor out, and he started plowing up 1 acre of land that he had rented. And his plan was, and he succeeded at this, was to raise crops and be able to give fresh vegetables to those who were receiving food because they didn't have any money or were poor or challenged. And that ministry grew to, I don't know how many acres now, but probably 15, 20 acres. He has a whole crew of townspeople that come out and help. And, what a marvelous ministry. And he's just like you guys and me, just a regular guy. So there's just all sorts of ways that we can serve. We got another guy that was once the youth pastor in our community, in our church, Salida Vineyard, named Kenny, and Kenny was fantastic with youth, still is. So what he's ended up doing is he's now working for social services in our community, our county, and he oversees the mentor-mentoree program for kids. So take what you have. You know what the word ministry really is? Everybody thinks it's, guys like me who are up front or pastors or whatever. Ministry is just taking what you got and using it in ways that reveal God to other people. Or simply initially just the love of God. And there's so many ways to do it. There's so many simple things. I mean, I was just thinking this morning, what if at Christmas time, instead of buying just one Christmas tree, we buy 2? And we give one of them away to someone that doesn't have the finances to buy one. Or what about, I've been noticing lately, cashiers and people who work in fast food places, restaurants, but mostly like where it's fairly fast, where you're just going to have minimal contact with the person. And these days, as I stand in line at our grocery store, I'm noticing that everybody is walking along with their eyes faced at something in their palm. And they finally get to the cashier, and he or she's been checking everything out, and it's just about done, and it's ready for payment, and they finally look up and da-da, and then they're gone. So I have this really weird thing. I don't know if it works in cities, but I think it would. I'm actually looking at the cashiers and going, so how's your day going? Oh, they're startled. And then they smile. And then some of them actually get really honest. Well, it's not going so hot, And I look if there's people in line, but if there's not people in line, I'll say, hey, can I pray for you right now? And, now we're getting really shocking. And it's been marvelous. But even just saying, how you doing? With sincerity. There's so many little ways that we can express the love of God. Our daughter, who's when she did this, she was in her 20s, staying at home with us. And she and my wife, Lisa, decided to have a neighborhood party and invite all the neighbors. Now, we live out in the country, so we're not in a situation where, the person comes home from work, they push a button and the garage door goes up. Their backyard has a 6-foot wooden fence that completely blocks off the neighbor's backyard. No, we actually have openness. We decided, let's invite all the people in our surrounding roughly 1 mile and have a picnic. And at first I'm thinking, oh, that's great. And then I started thinking, we got Republicans, Democrats, we've got rich people and poor people, we've got a Buddhist and a really strong Christian, we've got, on and on, all these varieties. I'm going, oh, Lord, Lord, Lord. It was fantastic. They all got along. And now they are friends to each other. So just think of just wonderful ways that you can reveal the kingdom of God, which will raise up the awareness of people of God and of you. And maybe they'll start asking questions like, why are you this way? And then we can start talking about Jesus. Okay, the next thing that's going to start happening with Joe here is in just a few moments, I'm going to, what we call, collar him in. Isn't this fun? I mean, I've been doing this for over 40 years, and it still makes me laugh. We're going to begin to shape Joe. You see, God is in the process of shaping each one of us, oftentimes quite uniquely. And a lot of times he'll do it in ways that we had never planned in our life to do that. But if we're obedient, we'll go, wow, God, this is so good. This is fun. It's really important to learn how to say yes, Lord. First of all, to say no, Lord, is an oxymoron. Because if we say no to him, then he's not Lord of our lives. But he is truly Lord. And while I'm doing this and stretching this out a little bit, how many of you have ever been stretched by God? Come on, let's see some hands. Yeah. It's a little frightening, but it's kind of exciting. And I already have a plan, a design in my mind of visual of what Joe's going to look like. So I'm stretching him out. And as I'm doing this, there'll be times when, and Joe's not quite at that point yet, but there'll be a time when I need to let this vessel dry out, stiffen up. And Joe might feel sort of set aside. Like, I enjoyed it so much when the potter's hands were all over me, but shaping me, stretching me, designing me. And at that moment, he might begin to wonder, sitting over here watching me make another pot, maybe he's forgotten me. Guys, there are times in our life when everything is really exciting with Jesus. You just feel the momentum of all that he's doing in us and through us. But then there's times when everything's quiet. I begin to worry, has he forgotten me? But I haven't. Because, for example, I might want to put some handles, small handles on Joe, design him a little bit differently, shave off some parts of the pot. And I have to wait till the clay is a little stiffer for that, or otherwise it would dent the pot. So now Joe could get really excited at this moment. He could say, oh, Potter, I'm ready to go out. Would you sell me right now? And I could go to somebody's house and I could be this big jar and somewhere prominent in the house. And, I'd be get filled with flowers. And, oh, that would be so much fun. I'm jazzed. I'm ready. Well, Joe, here's the deal. You're not really ready, because as soon as somebody puts flowers into you and then pours water to keep them fresh, you're just going to turn into a mud puddle in like 3 or 4 minutes. So in order for Joe to become something like this, he's got to go through a process. And what do we call that? It starts with the letter F. Fire. Firing a kiln. And I bring the temperature of my kiln up to a little over 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. It's quite a process. And I think about this process because what happens is I glaze the pots, I take them outside of my studio. They've never been outside the studio before. This is different. And I put them inside this large kiln. I have a huge kiln. I can stand up in it and spread my arms out and just barely touch the walls. And I brick up the door, and that's really the startling moment. It's like, where's the potter? He's always been around. What's going on? And they're talking, let's anthropomorphize these pots, meaning making them like people. Did you see the potter? No, I don't see the potter. Where's it gone? Oh my gosh. Oh boy. And then I light the burners. I use propane, and flames begin to go into the kiln. And I just imagine that at first they're kind of like, in a sauna or a hot tub, it's like, this is nice. But then it gets hotter and hotter, and pretty soon they're like, whoa, what's going on? And then the molecules of the clay begin to change and start to fuse together, and they're like, whoa. All that to say that in this process there's fear. Where is the potter? And all of us will go through periods in our life where crisis, difficult times, scary times. And we feel very alone and like, where's God? And the reality is that when I'm firing that kiln for the 24 hours that I'm doing that, I am constantly checking in on this kiln. I'm walking all around the kiln. I'm adjusting the burners, the amount of air going out, the damper slot, and on, because I want even temperature throughout the kiln. I want certain atmospheres in the kiln. So I am there attending the kiln. And David said, God is a very present help in times of trouble. Folks, we are going to go through some hard times, every one of us. And you may feel abandoned by God, but He is drawing ever closer. You may not see Him or feel Him, and the situation looks darker and darker, but that's where you and I develop real faith. We don't develop much faith in the easy times. We develop faith when everything feels like it's against us. And where is Jesus? He's always with us. I remember going to conferences many years ago, the founder of the Vineyard Movement, John Wimber, and he would talk a little bit about prayer, and he says, I've got one simple prayer. It's one word. Help! It's a really good one to remember. And God answers. Anyway, so there reaches a point of temperature where I can turn the kiln off. And if it goes 30 or 40 or 50 degrees hotter, the glazes will all begin to run off. The pots will begin to warp out of shape. I don't want that to happen. That's why I'm watching it so carefully. And then it cools down. And then I take the pots out of the kiln. And I examine each one of them and enjoy them. And wow. And one of the things that we need to remember, first of all, is that my pots don't stay in my studio. I make these pots to go out and other people can use them and enjoy them. And it gives, in a sense, me fame. And this building right here, this is a workshop of God, a studio of God. And the intention is not for you guys to camp out in this building. The intention that God has is to use Jack or other people in the church to love on you guys and teach the Word of God to you and present Jesus to you in ways that you just fall in love with Jesus. So make sure that you realize what you get in here, you need to take out of this building and live it out for the glory of God. And as you're doing that, there's different sizes of gifting and calling that God has for us. And we have to be careful that we don't become proud in it. For example, this large vase over here is not going to be hidden away in some closet. It's going to be in a prominent location. And the vase could become extremely proud, and the vase could turn into a vase. Same word, just a little different attitude. So for those of us, including myself, who, we're seen up front a lot. A lot of people know us. We have to be careful to remain humble and relaxed in that humility. And know what our purpose is. Because the vase can look at this little mug and go, "You're so little. Mug. You've not come far from mud." And get very proud. But whatever calling we have, this mug, you need to know what it is and live it out. This little mug goes, "Hey, I like being a mug." You know what? Every morning, the man or the woman of the house comes to the cupboard and pulls me out because I'm their favorite mug. Fill me up with coffee or hot tea or hot chocolate. Take me over to a comfortable seat nearby and sit down and lift me up to their mouth. And I refresh them. I love being a mug. So whatever God invites you into, do it with all that you've got for His glory. Okay, we're coming to the end of this message. I'd like to invite the worship team up. And I want to just do one more thing. There may be some of you in this, or one of you in this room, or perhaps several, who listen to this message, and deep inside of you, you're going, "Well, Dave, you really don't know my life right now. When I come to church or go to work or school or whatever, Dave, I walk in and everybody goes, 'Well, how you doing?' 'Oh, I'm fine. It's great. I'm fine. I'm okay.'" And you've heard this message and you're going, I really like the idea that God knows me and has a purpose in my life and can really use me. That's exciting. But deep down inside, when you go home, when you look in the mirror or consider your life, it's a train wreck. It's all full of holes, challenges. It may be addictions. It may be all sorts of things. You may have just broken up with your spouse. You, whatever, lost your job. And this is how you feel right now. You don't feel worthy to step out in Christ and do His ministry. So I want to just tell you a quick story about someone who didn't feel worthy. Jesus said that there was a man who was very wealthy and he had 2 sons. And the younger of the 2 sons came to the father one day and he said, "Father, I want my half of the inheritance now in cash." And the father, unbelievingly, actually gave this young man half of the estate in financial money. The young man took all this money and went to a faraway land, Jesus said. And soon it was all gone. When you suddenly get a whole bunch of money, it's really easy for it to run out of your hands. Or you just have a whole lot of friends who want to help you out with that money. And it was all gone. And there was a famine on the land, Jesus said. And there wasn't any opportunities for employment. In fact, the only employment that this young man could find was working for a hog farmer. And the farmer wouldn't even let him eat the hog food. And so the young man got hungrier and hungrier and hungrier. And then Jesus said he came to his senses. And his thought was, my father treats his servants really well. I've sinned against the Lord and against my father, but I could go back there and work for him. And he'll give me shelter like he does for all of his other servants. And he'll feed them and he'll clothe me. And that's what I'll do. So he begins the long walk home. And he walks and he walks and he keeps practicing. Father, Lord, I'm no longer worthy to be your son. But I want to work for you and let you take care of me. So he keeps walking, and One day the father is sitting out, I think, in front of his house, big house. I like to picture him on a porch with a rocking chair. And he's looking out over his acreage and all of his workers. And then he glimpses way off in the distance a little figure. And he kind of watches him for a while. And all of a sudden he sees that this person is walking in a certain way. Kind of looks familiar. Watches a little bit more, and this person is getting closer. And all of a sudden, the old man goes, "It's my son." And he jumps up and he hikes up his robes and he begins to run, this dignified old man running across the meadows. And he's running right to his son, and the son is going, in his own mind, he's really priming up, "Oh God, I've sinned against you and Father against you, and I'm no longer worthy to be your son." And the father comes up, and sure enough, out it comes. "Father, I've sinned against God and against you. I'm no longer worthy." And the father stops him right there and puts his arms around him and hugs him close to his chest. And he says to his servant, "My son was dead to me. He was lost. And now he's alive and home. Would you go kill the fatted steer, the best one we have on the ranch? We're going to invite everybody in Windsor tonight because there's going to be a celebration at my house. Oh, get the robe that's got the family pattern woven onto it. We're going to put it on his back so everyone that sees him will know that he's home and he's mine. Get the ring, the one that's got the engraving on it, that every time he presses it into the wax, he's got my authority. Go get the sandals. Go get the sandals. In those days, servants were not allowed to wear footwear. They had to go barefoot. What the old man was saying to his young son, "Son, you cannot work for shelter. You cannot work for my food. You cannot work for my clothing. All these are yours because you're mine." So if there's someone here today that you're struggling and you think there's nothing left for you, maybe somebody else has screwed it up, or maybe you have, and you're so discouraged, you feel so low, what Jesus would say to you is, "Come on home. Come on home to the Father. Let him love on you. Let him tell you who you really are. A son, a daughter. And care for you. And love you through this period. Because that's the heart